actually have one of his stories, or a partial one or something, for us tonight. So.
Oh, well. Very cool.
Hello.
Hey, it's Will, Wes, and Woody on the line, and I was just about to tell Will that I'd do anything to get your voice or Will's voice. I'd trade you guys' voices.
Will does have a good speaking voice, and I sure feel blessed, I'll tell you that. It's made making a living very fun and easy, and I don't get my hands dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill, you got a great voice.
How did you and Will meet? Just out of curiosity.
I contacted you, didn't I, Will?
I think so. Was it by way of Bobby Short?
It was, and I believe she recommended you. It's been just long enough that I have to stop and think about that, but I do believe it was Bobby she recommended. I think I probably wrote, and you agreed, and I remembered shortly after the first time you were on, I was like, man, I'd like to have you on once a month. And you told me you were on someone else's show.
I had done Chuck's show, Bigfoot Tonight. I hadn't really thought about, those shows. And then Bobby, of course, we were in touch all the time, and she says, Will, you need to be on these radio shows. And I'm like, well, no, you're okay. I'll take care of it for you. so she started sending out contacts to different hosts.
That's good. Bless her heart.
What got you into Bigfoot, Bill?
It's a weird story. The Legend of Boggy Creek came out, the movie. I was a young child. I watched it and was amazed. And after that, I didn't give Bigfoot a second thought until I saw Dr. Matthew Johnson on TV in the year 2000 talking about his experience. And the weirdest thing was there was no interest between Boggy Creek and 2000. I was doing my thing, my life, trying to be a DJ, enjoying the bass guitar, playing my rock and roll. And it was as if a light came on when I saw Dr. Johnson on TV, and I was like, I need to go see him and camp out with him where he had that sighting. And it's really bizarre because after that, it just came on full force. That's where I am today.
So have you had an encounter with Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever people want to call it out there? Have you actually had an encounter with them, or when you've gone out?
I've never had an encounter. The closest I've come, and this is interesting because when I lived in Idaho 4 or 5 years ago, I remember camping, and I heard a long howl. The irony of this is that howl was several miles away, and I could still hear it. It was the strangest feeling to hear something that was far off, but you could faintly hear it, and it was also the duration, 15 to 20 seconds, and I thought, I wonder if that's the real deal. To make it more interesting, several months later, 6-8 months later, I'm over in Oregon camping, and I hear the same thing, and it's from a distance, and it's almost 15 to 20 seconds long. And I thought, what are the chances that I would be near call blasters months and miles apart at the same time? And so I guess the closest I can say I've come is that I've heard them on 2 occasions, but at a distance, because that yell or howl really travels. Now that's not to say that I could have been in the woods at any time and one be nearby and I just didn't know it, but I don't know if I'll ever have an encounter. I'm fine if I don't. I'm enjoying the journey.
Yeah, no, I hear you. So as far as Bigfoot goes, and I got to tell you, I listen to your show. I enjoy your show a lot. I enjoy the Bigfoot stories that you do when you do like a middle of the show break, and so I really do enjoy the show. I wanted to ask you, in your mind, what do you think Bigfoot is? And it's something we ask everyone, and we all have different opinions. And I've heard your opinions on your show. I think you and my brother Woody would probably get along pretty well because you guys are kind of on the same path as far as trying to figure out what it is. But for everyone out there listening, what do you think Bigfoot is? Do you think it's just like a damn dirty ape out there running around, or do you think it's more than that?
In the beginning,
crudely. Go ahead.
That sounds like a name for a really good rock band, the Damn Dirty Apes. Oh, I have had to undergo a transformation. Being an open-minded person who's not shocked by much, I started out, as most people did, thinking this is something that I believed all along it was some type of person, just because the reports, even reading the reports on the BFRO, when you see what they do or read about what they do, it's to me evident that it's not an animal. As my show developed, I started getting guests on there. I would have one person on and they'd say, you need to have this person on. I'd have another guest and they would say, you need to have that person on. One thing led to another, and I ended up having guests on who claim to speak to them telepathically. And while that is controversial, I also keep in mind we haven't seen it all, and I've gotten to where I trust these people. They're not just guests on the show. They're now friends. And when they tell me the things they tell me, I've had one lady do a telepathic session with them who, and they discussed me. She basically told them about me, and I was allowed to ask 5 questions. And she asked them the questions, and they said things about me that nobody knows. And that really struck a chord with me, and I've come to the conclusion that I feel uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable. It's really hard. I have a lot of respect for Will. I know it's really hard for me to just come out sometimes. But
you can come out and say it. Me and Will make fun of you after the show anyway. So no, I'm just joking. I'm just joking, Bill.
It's one of those things where. Oh, it's okay. I've got 2 sweatshirts on tonight. I'm sitting out here under the full moon in my yard. I live in the woods, so my thick skin is on.
Is it a Viking sweatshirt?
You know it is, and I'm about to use it as toilet paper. We don't turn our systems around. Oh, man. But in a nutshell, I believe that they are interdimensional, that they are spirit as well as flesh and blood. Now, what makes that crazy is that nothing else that we know of on Earth can do that. So there's no point of reference for this, which makes it sound unbelievable. But when I talk to these people, I can't help but to conclude that they are correct, that they're not snowing me, that if you look at people who research and do typical research, what do they have to show for their research? Because they're trying to sneak up, outsmart, get a picture, or whatever. And what do they have to show for it? At most, a footprint, maybe some vocalizations. I just believe that there's more to this, just like the Bob Gimlin even said in one of Kiwoni Lapsaritis' books. He said, I always knew that there was more to this than it being just a wild animal. Why do people get made fun of when they come forward and say this has happened? People go, oh, that's a bunch of this. What have you been smoking that? We haven't seen it all, and ignorance and arrogance make it very hard for us to, what I call, peel the banana and see what is really out there.
Well, let me ask you this. So why do you think they're interdimensional? And I understand what you're saying about people's stories. And again, I listen to your show a lot. I know you're a kind man. You take for their word. As you were saying, hey, I trust these people, I think that's something lacking in this world. But I was in downtown Portland, and this one homeless man up there was telling me that up at the top of this tower where they had the radio station had all these, they have the huge satellites. He was saying they're mind controlling us, and the guy was sincere. He was telling me that the government's doing mind control through these things, and I honestly think he actually believed that. But is it something of, and I'm not, forgive the comparison, but is it something to where in their stories, is it just something you've heard over and over? I know you talked about your own experience. That kind of sounds like a ghost session, doesn't it? A little bit. And I mean that respectfully. Like, sometimes people sit and kind of talk with the dead, and they tell them things about themselves. Or was it different than that?
Well, I've talked to, let's see, 1, 2, 3 people who speak of what we're discussing. And
right.
One thing is a common theme with what they tell me is that the Sasquatch people only approach people who have a soft heart and who are going to be receptive to what they see and witness. It's true that, I say it's true. It's possible that they could be being snowed by whomever they're talking with when they go into these sessions. But it's someone will say, show me proof. Well, it's like, I'm not trying to prove anything. It's just I feel this deep in my heart, and I don't believe the repetition because there hasn't been enough repetition for it to sink in and condition me to be susceptible to that. But I choose to believe what they tell me, and I believe there's more to them when I read the stories that I read in these people's books. And when I talk to them, it's really hard for me to walk away and say they're wrong.
Right.
I just feel a strong tug, a strong pull. Our guest that's going to be on our show Tuesday, there's some fascinating accounts in his book about what has happened to certain Sasquatches that the government was involved in. The government, I believe, knows about them. I believe the government understands that they're is a UFO connection with the Sasquatch. I don't quite understand it all, and believe me, a lot of this, guys, I'm normal. I go to church. I'm just like anybody else. I just believe deep down that there's something more to this, and I believe I would be wrong to dismiss these guests who come on as being wrong. And I may be wrong, but you know, what's the penalty if any of us are wrong about this?
You're right.
Until we know what there is to know about it, it's an open field, and I'm just looking for answers. And what I like to do with my show is give those people, from the traditional guests such as Will to these other guests, I want to give people who've had these experiences a place to come talk about them, and that's where one guest leads to another. And the world that we live in, the things that are occurring, they're stranger than we can comprehend right now. It's almost like we're fourth graders who have just mastered our times tables, and then you throw geometry at us and you expect us to get that.
No, I'm with you. I mean, I don't believe my beliefs aren't that way, but I'm like you. I can't prove. I have no more proof than you do, so it's like kind of like what ground does any of us really have to stand on? The only thing where I get kind of lost, because I'm pretty open-minded. I would probably say, well, prior to our encounter, I was way more open-minded than Woody ever was, and I would say he's probably more open-minded about things now. Like the interdimensional stuff, I get kind of lost after Woody and I had our encounter. I know Woody talked a lot about the paranormal, and it was hard after seeing how these things moved. You know, when you don't have we talked about it last week, when you don't have a reference, when you actually see how they move and how they glide, and you've just never seen anything like that before, it's easy to go to the paranormal and say, well, that must be paranormal. That must be, because there's no reference for it. It's like Woody and I just called them monsters after we saw them because we didn't have a reference for what we actually saw. I mean, neither one of us, it took us a week before we said Bigfoot or Sasquatch. We just referred to them as monsters. But so I can understand how people go to these different, trying to explain the unexplainable at this point.
And what also gives strength to my belief that there is something more to them is when I read accounts, and I choose to believe these accounts in Kiwani's book and in other reports that come across my radar. What about the man in Oregon who shoots at one and it disappears in front of his eyes? I can understand seeing one glide or walk or be stealthy and being dumbfounded by that. But what in the world are you supposed to do when you raise a gun at one and even fire a shot and it disappears? Now, I'm not going to call the person a liar because I don't understand how that process works. That's what gets me to thinking. And when I read, I don't know if you've had a chance to read any of Kiwani's books, but there are accounts in there that, I can't pick and choose. I guess I can pick and choose what I'll believe and not believe, but I do choose to believe that these accounts are true. And when I read them, I think, this makes perfect sense to me as an open-minded person. Now, I don't understand every aspect of it, but when something disappears like that, goodness, what in the world do you make of that?
Let me ask you this then, Bill. If I told you today I knew where a group was and I was going to go shoot one, and then because I don't think I can get the body out, I'm going to take the head off and bring it back, would that not bother you then because you have a different belief? You don't believe that they're flesh and blood, so you wouldn't have any issue. Not you, but I mean, generally speaking, people who have that belief really wouldn't have any problems with someone who's wanting to go out to, and I'm not saying my intentions would be something like show proof to the community, get science involved, maybe start preservation, that sort of thing. It wouldn't be just to kill one. I mean, there would be a reason behind, more or less I'm justifying my reason for it. But if I were to say that, would that bother you at all?
No, not at all. And that's one of the things that, boy, at the risk of sounding self-serving, that's one of the things I like about me. Is that you could tell. I know that's bad. That's bad. The listeners are like, listen to this guy. He must be in charge of his own PR department. But if you and I were walking out there and well, I'm trying. But no, and that's the neat thing is this. How my brain is wired. I could hear that from you and say, well, you know what? You can give that a try, but here's why I don't think it's going to work. And I would tell you that what you're about to try is akin to calling Will and saying, I'm going to come sneak in your front door and steal something out of your refrigerator, and I'm going to try to do it without you seeing me. The thing is these creatures, these people, oftentimes show themselves to people who don't believe because they're not thinking about them. And one of the quickest ways, I believe, to repel a Sasquatch is if you go in the woods thinking, I want to see one, I want to look for sign. It's almost like you're sending a million candle spotlight in front of you that they're going to see. And if you go out there with that intent like you described, I wouldn't judge you. I really wouldn't. I'd say, you know what, that's your prerogative, but I believe you won't succeed because your intent. And if they are psychic, as I believe they are, then they're going to know you're coming and you won't stand a chance.
No, I really appreciate your answer a lot, because I've talked to other people who have your beliefs, and I've said that to them. Then they get all upset. It's like, well, if you think Bigfoot's a leprechaun, has all these magical powers, and you think, I'm not talking about you, Bill, I'm talking about other people, that if you have all of these beliefs, and they can disappear, then why does it bother you so much if I say I'm going to go kill one and bring it in? And then it's kind of like the conversation goes nowhere. So I really respect your answer that you don't think that I could do it. I mean, I respect that more than just getting upset. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. And that's one thing I've learned is to not let emotion get in the way. I know this, that when I have these guests on the show, it's made me stop and think. I've had to go through my own transformation. I started out believing one thing. As time went by, whether it's with reports read or guests on my show, I've had to change my position on what I think they are. And it's one common theme you hear over and over from people like Kathleen Greavy-Odom and Kiwoni Lapsaritis is that the Sasquatch people are always talking about from the heart. It comes from the heart. I feel from my heart very strongly about this in a way that I never felt about it when I was just in the flesh and blood. And I'll circle back and say, you know, people say, well, what do you think they are, flesh and blood or spirit? Well, the answer is, I believe, as I've read, that they are both. I don't know why. They are an anomaly as we know it and can do both. I believe the Native Americans, when they talk about them the way they do, and they are like our big brother. They were here before us. They are concerned about the planet and what we're doing to it. And I'm not trying to sound like a tree hugger, but there are things that are going on that if we hit the pause button on life as we knew it and all the answers came forth, I think a lot of people would be shocked at how bizarre the world really is. We just think that it's one-dimensional. You go to work, you come home, you might go out to eat. Well, there's a lot more to life. And I don't know that we'll ever answer the Sasquatch mystery. I don't know that it's ever meant to be answered, because you mentioned protection a few minutes ago. When Kathleen went into...
I just say that. I don't really mean it. I just say it. I don't really mean it.
A lot of people think...
Because, you know, there's no one really... I mean, we can barely get a picture of them. Do we really need to protect them? You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. Because... And that's one thing Kathleen said when I asked the questions. One of them was, what can I do for them? And they said, we don't need any help. It was... They are... People think, well, if we kill one, we can save and protect them. Well, that's not going to come into play because they don't need our help, and all that officially recognizing the Sasquatch would do, among other things, would be to send a bunch more people into the woods and make it hard on them when they are in the flesh and blood mode here. And this is so hard to discuss because, you know, here's the thing. I'm not an expert, and Kathleen won't just get on any show. I would really love for her to be able to, she can do, and Kiwoni can do such a better job of this than me. I'm just the messenger, one who believes, but what they're experiencing, it's tough. It's really hard.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's something to where it's, even saying Bigfoot exists is hard, you know, let alone getting into the muddy water of what we're dealing with. But I had two questions for you, and then I'll stop hogging you. I also have the Trent Bigfoot vocalizations to play, get your guys' take on it. So if they're interdimensional, does it throw you off a little bit when you hear people come up with evidence, like fur and like scat, where it's eating food? I would think something that could go spirit and physical. My first question would be to Bigfoot would be, really, do you have to come in our woods and take a dump if you're spiritual? I mean, can't you go and, you know what I mean? And then
exactly.
So, I mean, what do you think about the actual physical evidence that people provide?
And just guessing here, if I were to throw a guess out there, I would have to believe that when they are in the physical world, they're subject to the rules of the physical world. And as Kiwoni mentions in one of his books, there are portals, doors that open, and that humans, have disappeared into these portals. And one guy was skiing. All of a sudden, boom, he's not where he was. And he was quick enough to get back through before the door shut that he was back in this realm. But had he stayed where he was, he would be subject to the laws, not literally as far as police laws, he would be subject to the laws and rules of where he got stuck. I believe in just trying to connect the dots as an amateur who doesn't know you-know-what from Shinola, that I believe they're subject to the laws of where they are when they're there. That's the best I can come up with. And it makes sense. I've yet to come up with something where I'm like, well, you try to connect the dots in your own words, and I feel that that's how they are when they are here, is that they have to eat, they have to take a dump in the woods, they have to play by the rules here, and then when they go, I don't know what the rules are in the spirit world, but that would be what I would say to that.
But hearing the story like the skier, doesn't it kind of, and then after this we'll beat you up, and then you and Woody will get along well. But so if someone said to me, okay, the skier disappeared, and what happened is a portal opened up, and he went into the portal, and then it closed, and then he disappeared. I'm not really sure did you see that? My first question would be, did you see that happen? Or, maybe he just was skiing and got lost, and it was wintertime, and no one could find the body, and eventually predators got him. Or I guess that's two different minds in how they work. But my first question would be, did you see that? Did you see the portal open and him disappear? Maybe there's, like I've heard people when they say, well, Bigfoot just disappeared. Woody and I have seen King Kong drop to all fours, and when he drops down like that, I could see how they could crawl off really quick, and if you weren't paying attention, you would think, hey, that just disappeared. I guess in my mind, and again, I'm not trying to beat you up, in my mind, I would think that just disappeared. Well, maybe he dropped, maybe he crawled off, to jump to the conclusion, well, there's portals, and so he went into a portal, he's half spirit creature, I sound like a dick when I'm saying this, but I'm trying to be respectful. It would almost seem more logical to, well, maybe it just dropped and took off, and in a split second you didn't see it. Did you see a portal? You see where I'm going? I guess I sound like a jerk, so I'll just back.
Right? No, not at all. In the case of the skier, he was alone, and he just recounted that story. But one of the key components of, if you see one disappear, well, what are the surroundings like? Were there trees nearby? Where I'm standing now, there's enough open space that if I saw one right now and it disappeared, if it wasn't in a bunch of thick brush or dense jungle, then it's going to be very hard to explain that it dropped on all fours, because it doesn't matter if it's 2 feet tall or 20 feet tall. If it drops on all fours and there's an open enough clearing, I'm going to see it. Now, if it's dense, then there's credence to your argument, but it's just hard for people to buy that because there's no point of reference, and it sounds out of this world. But maybe in 5,000 years, we'll be able to do that too, and it'll be looked at as normal as blowing your nose. I
guess for me, it's just two different minds think, and I respect the way you feel and your thoughts on it. Like for me, I know if Woody said, well, I was out hunting and it just disappeared, my first comment to him would be, well, you took a shot and you missed then? Is that what you're saying? You shot and you missed, and now you're coming up with this. You know what I mean? I would immediately jump to, well, it didn't really disappear. You missed, is what you're saying. Or you
well, you know better. You know better than that. I don't miss. I'm a better shot than you are.
Yeah.
Well, and it's a case of when something like that happens, people will say we're conditioned to saying, well, where's the proof? I need proof. Some people will say I have to see it, believe it, and I'm quick to jump in and say, well, you believe in God? Yes, I do. Well, you've never seen him.
Yeah, that's true, but and again, I'm not really a Christian. I'm not really, for me, not to go off topic too much on the God thing, but when you look at the mountain, the sun comes up every day, I breathe, I can sit, move my fingers, the body, for me, there's so much more to say, well, maybe there is something higher up of intelligence that created us, because coming up from a monkey, I don't really buy. I guess it all has to do with beliefs. You're right, though. The first thing is, where's the proof? And with this subject, it's tough to produce that. Because I'll sit and listen to anyone. I'll listen to anyone's ideas, and if it makes sense to me, I'll buy it onto it. But I respect everyone that shares their opinion. I wish more people would share and there wouldn't be such the attack. You know what I mean?
There are some groups and some persons who whine like a 13-year-old female when they are presented with something different than what they believe, and I'm always dumbfounded at why someone would get defensive and pissy when confronted or presented with a different point of view. I want to ask them, and I'll tell you something else. Kathleen, when she did the session with the Sasquatch people, they were happy to hear that I'm presenting their case to my listeners. The thing that struck me as much as anything was that they asked that I present their case with a soft heart. And I'll tell you, there was a time not long ago when someone wanted to make fun of Bigfoot, I would attack their character and leave them in tears if I could, because how dare you, in all your infinite stupidity, presume to know it all? You want to say Bigfoot's a joke, I'm fixing to make you cry, dumbass. But you know what? They asked that I present their case with a soft heart. And it's gone against everything I've done when confronted with an arrogant smartass to not be that way back. So right. I have taken their words to heart, and I present their case with a soft heart. It's still a learning process, because there are times I would bring Bigfoot up in front of a stranger just to see their reaction, hoping that they would start making fun of it, because then I could tear their character in two. I've had to change, because they've asked me, and I've chosen to believe what Kathleen says is true. So it's been a learning process for me. And what I was going to say, my original point, when someone starts getting pissy when I bring up this aspect of Bigfoot, I want to say, did you breastfeed 5 years too long? Because you sure are whining. And I hope that's not too strong. That was not directed at you. It's just, it's very hard for me to control myself when someone is being a smart ass. And I'm not saying how you're doing. I'm fine with you, but it's some of these people on Facebook, some of these groups that they live for poking and pushing buttons. And it's like, are you that threatened by something that you're not familiar with?
No, I agree with you. I mean, I've had people say to me, they think Bigfoot is a person. I'll ask them, well, why do you think Bigfoot is a person? Why do you think Sasquatch is a person? And then they get all flustered with the fact that it seems like they don't really know themselves, or maybe can't express it, so they get frustrated. I just want to know why they think it's a person. Maybe there's something to what they're saying, maybe not.
Robert W. Morgan, who helped me a lot as far as getting past the animal to person, Robert and I didn't get into too much of the interdimensional stuff, none of that. Now, he's seen UFOs when there were Sasquatches around, but the one thing Robert told me, humans have set themselves up for this fault that I'm about to describe. The Sasquatch either have to be classified as a separate but equal species, or we have to redefine what humans are, and that is because they share the traits that make humans unique, and that's articulated speech, an opposable thumb, they sit on their buttocks, and they use stone markers to bury their dead. As one Native American witnessed several Sasquatches rolling a boulder that would otherwise need to be moved, would need a caterpillar to move it over the body of a deceased Sasquatch. And so by our own definition, they are people, which means if we're not going to include them, we've got to change the definition of what makes a person a person.
Yeah, and I think right there, that question has been long debated. When you think of like a gorilla, we can teach a gorilla to sign. We can teach it. I've seen a gorilla cry over its cat, that famous one, Coco. Coco, yeah. So they have, I was telling Woody about these orangutans out in this zoo. These orangutans kept getting out of their cages. And the main zookeeper guy would come in the morning and they'd be up in the trees. He was upset by this because someone left the door open. There's a locked door to where they shouldn't be able to get out. They kept getting out. So he called in the staff and he said, hey, we can't it's a liability if they get out like they're getting out. We need to make sure we have this door closed and it's locked. No one said that they did it. Everyone said, no one would admit to it. And it happened again, and it happened again. He'd come in the morning. These orangutans would be up in this tree just hanging out by the zoo. They weren't actually in their enclosure, though. So finally he gets upset, and he sets up a hidden camera. So he's going to find out which employee is doing it so he can nail him. Come to find out, this orangutan pulled a wire out of its mouth, had picked a lock, and then let the other orangutans out.
Wow.
The reason why they found this, they thought that someone had just left the door open because the orangutan was kind of doing something by the door, and then the door opened, and he let the rest of the orangutans out, and they went and played in the trees. But as they were putting them back in their cages, they saw something in his lip, and what they had seen in his lip was this wire, the wire he used to pick the lock. He hid it in his lip. So it shows not only that the point of the story, though, is it's amazing that he was able to pick the lock and get out, but the fact that he had deception. In order to deceive someone, you have to get inside their head. And what he was doing is he was hiding that wire in his mouth so that it wouldn't be taken away. So it's not like he just carried it around in his hand. He was deceiving his keepers because they wanted to go out and hang out in the trees. And so when you talk about like Bigfoot and their intelligence and that they're people, what kind of defines us as people? Is it that we're so smart? Because I know a lot of people who aren't as smart as an orangutan. I'm sure you guys do too. But what defines us as people? What actually makes us people? Is it people think of orangutans as just as, a damn dirty ape, but they're actually a little bit more than that. There's a lot more to them than that. I know the stories. I think there's an ape or a monkey or an ape. I'll have to look it up now that I open my mouth. But in India, Will probably knows this better than I do, but they actually bury their dead. And they do it just like how you described. They dig a hole, dump the body in, and then put rocks over the top of it. And they have video of these primates burying their dead. And so outside of humans, to see primates bury their dead is... So, I mean, what kind of defines us as human? What makes us human?
That's a very interesting point you bring up, and I think what comes into play here, too, is the ignorance and arrogance that as humans we think that we have cornered the market on certain things, emotions, intelligence, this and that, and when you see things and you see animals do things, we're reminded that while we are more intelligent than any of the animals on the planet, they're not as far back as we think they are.
Will, did you want to beat up on Bill for a while? I think he's probably...
I would never beat up on Bill. Bill and I are good friends. I'm going to give Bill a plug here for all of our listeners who don't know. Bill's the host of a radio show called Inspired by Bigfoot. It's a great show. Go listen on Tuesdays if you get a chance to. Bill's a wonderful host. And Bill, he had me laughing so hard. One of the first shows, you remember, Bill, when you did the See and Say Bigfoot, it was like a mock commercial he came up with. And I was totally unaware of this, and he just had me rolling. Because, we can picture it when we were kids, and they had the See and Say toys. And with all I've been listening, to all the conversation, and of course, with all the years I've been involved in this, you learn to listen to a lot of different things. One of the things that I've been working on that I'm going to really throw a wrench into people's thinking is the fact that, everybody today out there labels everything big and hairy as either Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and it's really not the case. We may have as many as 4 different species out there. So when we talk about, and Wes and Woody and I have all three encountered one type that I call the true Sasquatch, which really is more animal, and oftentimes they're very surly and can be vicious and aggressive, while there's another type that's a little more like the Russian Almas that's a lot more human. And it may be that, what you're talking about, Bill, is that species, whereas the ones we've seen, are something completely different. And everybody gets confused because they're labeling everything under, one type, and it really isn't one type. And I'm not sure what your thoughts on that are, but...
Actually, I've got a good addition to what you're saying, and you're on the mark there, because one thing Kiwoni mentions in his book, The Psychic Sasquatch and Their Interdimensional Connection, is that there is the Sasquatch, and then there is what they call the ancient ones. And the ancient ones are the ones that the arms are in proportion to the body, the round heads, no cone. And then there are the ones who have more of a gorilla-type head. In fact, I think Kiwoni mentioned in his book there were 4 to 7 types around the world, with the least advanced one being the Yeti. The skunk ape was mentioned as another one, but he says many people confuse a Sasquatch with an ancient one, and that's one thing we need to make sure that when you see one, that doesn't mean that everyone looks like it, and if you see it do 1, 2, 3, or 4 things, it doesn't mean they all do that. We got to be careful not to to put them all in one box. There's, the Minnesota Iceman. What in the world is that? Is that from Vietnam? Is that some kind of Neanderthal? It's more like an ancient one than a Sasquatch.
Exactly. Yeah, it doesn't really look anything like a Sasquatch. In fact, I'm working on a book about that currently. There was nothing about that creature and the other ones that was with it that really, other than the fact that it was man-like and hairy, you could even put it in that category. All the other features were nothing like what the traditional Sasquatch in the Patterson film is. And I really think there is a lot of confusion out there, and a lot of these people, we were talking about them, all the backbiting on Facebook, for instance. I've seen a lot of that and get disgusted with it very quickly. I think it's a lot of these people really don't know what they're talking about. They get a little piece of this subject, and they think they know what they're talking about. And if they get a little bit of attention, then it's sort of that, I'm going to be, famous, the rich and famous angle. And maybe that clouds their judgment. I have seen it many, many times, where somebody will get involved in the subject and then just changes them. Their whole attitude and demeanor and everything completely changes, and they're very people that I don't want to be around when they change like that. I think they need to really be a little more open-minded and just maybe a little less quick to open their mouths and think a little bit more before they make a judgment on something without the experience to make that judgment call.
And a lot of that is probably the anonymity of being behind a computer, because I've often thought, how impolite would these people be if we were all in a room discussing it face-to-face where there were instant repercussions for that type of behavior? And as a radio person for 34 years, I've seen what the media spotlight can do to make an ass out of people as far as arrogance. I've seen it from TV people. Some of the most arrogant people around are the news anchors or the sports guy on television. And when some of these people get a little bit of attention, they can't handle it. And having grown up in a radio family and started on the air at 14, I got over that a long time ago and always told myself, be nice, be approachable, don't act any different on the air than you are off the air. And part of the qualities of the show that I like that I do is that I do invite people to come on and discuss the weirder aspects of Bigfoot. And I'm not going to say, I don't agree with your thought process, you can't come on. It has brought me some of the most interesting guests by being open-minded, and I wouldn't trade their friendship or stories or experiences. I'd rather broadcast to 2 people discussing the weirder aspects than to broadcast to 100,000 rehashing the same old, I heard a Bigfoot fart, I saw a Bigfoot track. Ooh, I found a 5-gallon bucket full of Bigfoot doo-doo. How exciting. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's enough of that out there.
Yeah, there's plenty of that out there.
And so that's what happens when the people are that way, when they're snotty, because if I hear something I don't like, I'll be like, well, no, that's interesting. Help me understand where you're coming from. And some people are that way anyway, but I think the anonymity of the Internet makes some people be a little more belligerent than they would be if you were standing there having a conversation face-to-face.
And one of the things I saw that was kind of disturbing recently was there was, and I can't remember which site it was, but once in a while we'll go just to kind of see what's being talked about. I always try to gauge what opinions are out there on the subject. There was somebody who was complaining about some of these so-called seasoned researchers beating up on the new people. And I had to put my 2 cents worth in by saying, that any of the new people were more than welcome to contact me if they liked. Basically to hell with these other people, because I would be more than willing to help them out and maybe guide them a little bit if they wanted me to. And I would certainly take any of these people on if they like that, because I'm sure I have at least 20 more years of experience than just about any of these people out there. So I'm one of the few people that aren't too afraid of any of these jokers out there. But it bugs me beating up on the newer people,
I was just going to say, it's almost like they're saying, this is my subject. You have to have permission to enter.
And that's exactly, I think, what's happening.
Marking their territory.
Yeah, if they want to take me on, they can, by all means, if they think their britches are big enough, bring it on. It
almost sounded like Will said, if they think their bitches are big enough. And it's like, oh, man, I've never been beaten up by 6'2". Well, I got.
No, I don't want to take them on, but if they think their pants are big enough, or shoes are big enough, come on and. And it's funny, the attitudes too. I think I mentioned, we talked about it. I brought it up last week. I think we were talking about people's attitudes when I was talking with Joe Rogan a few months back. With the show that they filmed for Sci-Fi, and he was on pushing me to try to raise money to go out and prove that they exist. So I went ahead and did it, and I had 2 people that just on Facebook just raised a big stink about that. And I thought, well, geez, I mean, you know, what's wrong with trying to raise money to do anything? I mean, everybody raises money for all kinds of things. It was funny that I guess maybe because of who I am, they thought I was actually going to get $10 million and run out and prove one, and you know, they weren't going to have the subject to use as a crutch anymore.
Right, and the defensive-ness, I try to ask myself, are there other subjects or arenas or areas of interest where you will see such a backbiting backlash? And off the top of my head, I can't think of any, but there is something about this subject that for some people it makes them belligerent, and I haven't quite figured out what it is. Why? I don't know that I ever will, but it's interesting to note that.
You know, you're right. I've got friends who are involved in the subject of UFOs, and none of them are like that. They all seem to get along very well, and everybody, you know, will bring out what information they have, and they share it. And I'm thinking this subject is completely the opposite.
Mm-hmm. It's an amazing journey, because as a Christian who goes to church, and I go to a church that's laid back. I don't want a preacher in robes and a choir with a hellfire and damnation. I don't want to hear that. Our church is laid back. I get to play my bass up there. We play decent music. They don't let me play Rush, but that's okay. You can't have it all. But and I'm a Rush head, man. I play that Rush loud. But it's been a fascinating journey for me, because I want to tell people I'm a Christian. I believe in God, and I believe in Bigfoot. Deal with that, Christians. And I'd love to see the look on some of their faces, because I've just challenged their entire belief system.
Yeah, and most Christians don't act Christian, so I guess that's kind of a...
Exactly right.
So, I mean, I appreciate
exactly
that you're so open, Bill. It's going to go back to what Will was saying. You know, yeah, no, you are, and I really do enjoy your show. I mean, I'm not just saying that because you're on ours. I really do listen to your show and do listen to it. So I know, you know, and I've heard you in the past. So I know you're a kind soul. You let people on. You give them a voice. And, you know, after you have an encounter, after you have something like this, it's just a relief to get it off your shoulders and actually talk to someone. I mean, I felt 100 times better after I talked to Will, and Will has a way of making you feel easy, making you feel, you know, making it comfortable so you can talk. And so, I mean, that's one thing I would recommend, is that people do talk to Will. But with regard to raising money, and doesn't it kind of throw you guys off when someone says, hey, I want to get money together to go prove this, or they're trying to make money so that they can spend more time proving this? And the reason why I think we haven't gotten the proof that people want, no one has the time or money. If someone had the time and money to go out there and spend time in the field, I think we could wrap up what Bigfoot is pretty quick. I don't think we're going to do it through, I mean, I hate to say the Falcon Project. I don't want to beat it up, but I don't think we're going to prove it that way. I think it's the way you're going to prove it is with time and money, and get people out there to provide proof. I mean, don't you think?
There's a lot of there are a lot of hurdles in that approach. And if you, as they say in the WWE, if the wrestlers are doing a good job and you get angry, they have suspended your disbelief. And just like an actor, if you get angry at an actor on TV or happy they've done their job. So I want to relate a quick story in one of Kiwani's books, because I'm going to tell you who has the answer. If you choose to suspend your disbelief in my position for just a minute and accept it, then it does make sense, and that is the U.S. government. And here's why I say it. We're going to talk about this on the show Tuesday. There's an account in his book that blew my mind away, and it starts with a woman who was a habituator and was feeding them. Well, one of the large males in the nearby clan was lured by agents of the U.S. government to a building under the pretense of friendship, and they gave him food with a powerful sedative in it that knocked him out. They then put an implant in the back of its head so they could track him. Well, he was let go, and he went back to his clan. He was not the leader, but he went back and had an argument with a female Bigfoot that had two young ones, and the female was arguing for continuing to accept food from the human. The male Bigfoot was very angry at this happening because he had been betrayed, and he got so angry that, according to this account in Kiwani's book, the male killed the female, and there was a punishment that came with that. The leader of the clan telepathed the lady in question and said, I took a bottle of antifreeze from your garage and made the male drink it, and his punishment was death for killing another Sasquatch. The Sasquatch got violently ill after drinking the antifreeze and went to a cave where he'd been hanging out, and he telepathed the lady and said that this Sasquatch that drank the antifreeze wanted to kill the lady's husband because he was so angry at the humans for betraying his trust. that as he was fading away, he telepathed her and said, "My life force is fading away. They're going to come to get me. The helicopter will soon be here because the implant has given my location away." If you choose to believe that, and I know for your listeners, I'm not trying to insult or offend, but if you choose to believe that, the answer is there. The government has it, but I can guarantee to you they're not going to talk. I choose to believe that. We're going to go into that on Tuesday's show. If that kind of stuff is going on, can you imagine what that would do to the public if that were to get out as fact with proof to back it up?
Yeah. I guess my two comments would be, that's a woman for you. And
yeah. Well, it's deep. That stuff's deep, and there are a lot of people who will say, "What's he been smoking?" Again, I choose to believe what I'm told, and I followed this path, and until I hear otherwise, if there's no proof of that, I don't know. What I'm trying to say is that the answer, I believe the government has the answer with the UFO thing as well, but you know as well as I know they're not going to tell us.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bill. You know what's great about all this is talking with Will, and I've been talking to Will quite a bit lately, and Wes, yourself, and Bill, you too. Is we all kind of have a different perspective on it, and we all can voice our own opinions. You all give your input, and you have positive things to say. It's not a big bashing here. We're not making fun of people. One thing I really like, Bill, you said, going back to the paranormal thing, you had made a comment. You said that you think the paranormal could be also a spirit and also could be a earthly being, which, I've never thought about that. So it kind of opened my eyes, and I'm learning every time I do a show or I talk to somebody different. I like to take the different input from different people. And I kind of, like talking to Will last week, I asked him that same question. I was like, could this be paranormal? Will had made several different comments, and it kind of drew me towards more off the paranormal. But then talking to you kind of got me back on it again. It's exciting. It's exciting to talk to different people and hear what they have to say. I really enjoy it.
So you have no opinion, is what you're saying?
No, I have an opinion.
I'm just joking.
I guess what I'm saying. No, what I'm saying is I really appreciate Bill bringing that point out, and also you, Wes, last year, like, well, they take a dump in the woods. Well, something spiritual wouldn't take a dump in the woods. I made the comment after we told about our encounter to Will last week. He said, well, I had said, well, the way they move, the way they react, the way it went down on all fours. Will was like, well, sometimes you perceive, and I'm not sure, Will, exactly how you said it, the woods, that everything moves like humans do, and they don't. So your first instinct is to think it's part of the paranormal. And
yeah, the term is anthropomorphisms.
That's what it was.
We try to impose our thinking and way of viewing things on everything non-human. So that's our expectation, is something's going to do something like we would, and they really don't.
It's a learning process for me, and it's just great to have people to have good answers and keep me thinking.
Yeah, you're kind of breaking up. But before you go, Bill, I'm just teasing you, Wood. I'm teasing you. I think I got the point.
No.
We got to all sit and kind of listen to each other and respect what each other has to say. I mean, until someone has definitive proof, it's like what Bill said. What harm does it do? But what were you saying, Bill? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, not a problem. I actually thought I was the one cutting out, and I wanted to say, who's beeping in on me? But what I did in the early days when I would hear these paranormal accounts, I put it in the back of my mind because I said, you know what? I'm new to this. I don't disbelieve that. I can't grasp it, comprehend, or understand it. So I'm going to put it in the back of my mind, and when I get a little more understanding about what these things are about, then I'm going to circle back and pull that egg out of my Easter basket and look at it a little closer. And that's what I would ask the people listening to the show to do, is to just keep an open mind, because if you I thought of this today while I was walking in the woods. Here's my expression about closed minds. Here's what a closed mind will get you. It's almost like receiving the key to a sports car and somebody says, here, have fun, but you got to stay in the driveway. That's not going to get you very far.
Yeah, you're right.
And so,
yeah, Bigfoot's kind of like religion. If you're not my religion, then we're going to have problems. It's kind of that same mentality out there. And I don't want to overgeneralize, but I would say most of the community is like that. It's almost like a different religions trying to all have the same conversation.
Mm-hmm. It is fascinating. There's a whole new subject that could be a spin-off of this, and that would be the psychology behind the different behavioral responses in people. I would love to hear a psychologist explain, why do people get emotional about this, perhaps because it deals with paranormal things. We think we're the only thing on the planet on two legs and all sorts of things. And it does bring out emotions in people. It's not like we're talking about what's the difference between a MiG-29 and an F-16.
It's because they don't know. I think, personally, myself, if there's definitive factual proof on something and you can prove it, well, then it's either on or off. And I think that if you don't know, you don't, and you got to back up what you believe, and that's why the emotions come in, is what I think.
Something that Renee always said to me was that, if you want to know what somebody's about, find out what their motivation for getting into the subject is. What have they got to get out of it? Those of us that have seen one, that's kind of a different story. You're sort of thrown into that situation. And, of course, Bill, you've done it with the radio show and things like that. But for just somebody to go out there and say, well, I think I'm going to go hunt for Bigfoot, they've got to know what the ridicule factor is and what can it do to your image personally and publicly. So, what do they think they're going to get out of getting into this? And I think that explains a lot of their behavior.
There is a price to pay. One of the first things I told myself is you must not care what other people think if you're going to publicly talk about this subject. And secondly, I'm not afraid to talk about it because as a speaker, as a communicator, voice actor, whatever you want to call me, I can discuss this with anybody and not come away with a black eye. I would definitely warn anybody who is going to be a smart aleck about it, because that's when, like I said earlier, I want to cut them to pieces, but I can't because I don't have enough experience at politely stating my case, especially when someone's being pissy, because I'm like, oh, you want to be pissy? Okay, I'm going to match you and raise you 5 and show you what it's like to be on the receiving end.
Nice.
Bill, I wanted to ask you something. Tell us about your Bigfoot stories and your recent publishing.
This is actually, I think it's turned into my favorite part of this whole ride. I don't know where the idea came. Actually, I do know. I think the idea was given to me somehow, God or the Sasquatch people. I don't know. It just it occurred to me when I put the show together. I thought, you're a voice guy. You have the capability to put together a story each week that, to the best of my knowledge, no other show does, and what a great way to set yourself apart. So that's where I got the idea for the fictional Bigfoot stories, although some of the instances in there are based on real things that have happened. And so that's what gave me the idea to do it. And then I wanted to take it a step further, and those stories are now available on Amazon.com for your Kindle and on Audible.com and iTunes as audio books. They're short stories, 3 to 5 minutes, and I hope one day to be able to, make a good income from that. And people say, he's profiting from Bigfoot. I'm like, you know what? I'm a voice guy. What do you expect? You're going to tell me what I can talk about and what I can't talk about?
That's right.
So those stories are,
Bill.
Well, Tuesdays is titled Sasquatch and UFOs, and it gets pretty deep, and it kind of echoes what Kiwani was saying about the government and what they know. You yourself have told me, Will, I think about people who have gotten close, have had the black cars arrive, and people in Kiwani's book have been called and told, drop this or else. Why would the government be interested if people weren't getting close to the truth?
Yeah, the government told us that. That's what we saw. The Forestry Service actually, I think he got tired of hearing me say monsters, but he flat out told Woody and I that's what we saw.
Did he?
So, yeah.
Yep.
We called it
fishing. He talked to the Fish and Game, told him that, yeah.
Yeah, Fish and Game, not Forestry Service. The Fish and Game, I called them after our encounter, and, neither of us really had a reference to what we saw, and I kept telling them, I even hate telling this story because I sound like a moron, but I kept saying, there's monsters up there, someone's going to get killed. And the Fish and Game guy told me, well, you guys had Sasquatch encounter, and I had told him, we'll take lie detector tests. He said, there's no need for that, Wes. You guys have way too many details about how they move, really, for this to be made up. And so they told us that they would take it from there and be in contact with us if they needed further information, and that was the last we ever heard of it. Then shortly after that, it's when we started getting into the Sasquatch subject.
An interesting account, and I applaud the Fish and Game response or the game warden's response. Very interesting.
But Fish and Game in that county is very interesting. When I was working in that same area where Wes and Woody had their encounter, and it's very near where I saw my second sighting, I used to go up there and park my car, and Wes and Woody know the Washougal River. There's not a lot of people that go up there. It never really has been. Myself and a few people who were with me one time, we stopped at the snow line, hiked up in the snow line a few hundred yards because we were finding tracks up there back in 87 or so. I heard what sounded like somebody using a crowbar to pry into my car. So me and two of the guys went running down the hill, and I saw this guy in regular civilian clothes next to a pickup, standing next to my car. Of course, I was fresh out of the Army, so my language wasn't clean like it is today. And I started chewing this guy out, using very few clean words. And then I happened to glance while I was in mid-tirade at this partner in this truck. Well, the guy was in uniform. I saw the badge, and I thought, well, if I stop now, I'll look like an idiot. So I finished chewing on this guy. Then I proceeded to go over and chew on the guy wearing the badge. He apologized profusely, and then he says, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Jeving. I didn't mean to upset you." And I thought, how does he know who I am? Well, it wasn't that long before this time that a newspaper article had come out locally in the Canvas newspaper about me and my work and my group in that area. So he knew I was a Bigfoot hunter. It was odd that every time it didn't matter where I was in Skamania or Clark County, these guys were never very far away from me. And they'd always say, "Oh, we'll watch your truck for you. We'll do this," trying to be very helpful. I'm thinking, it just didn't add up. Why were they so interested in what I was doing?
It's interesting what you say about, too, how do you stop in the middle of a chewing out without looking like a complete psycho?
Well, I was so used to it in the military. It's like, well, once you're in the middle of it, you just keep running with it, and when you're done, you're done. I was not a happy camper, and I thought, you know what, this guy's gotten chewed, so I'm going to go chew his partner, too.
That's one thing, that the more public and the more visible you are about it, the government will leave you alone if you're out there call blasting and doing what they are on the TV show Finding Bigfoot. The government is not interested because I believe they have the answers, as I outlined earlier, and they're not worried about those people. But for people who have had phone tap, people who have had threatening phone calls, people who have been intimidated with the black cars, you have to ask yourself, why is this the case? These are people who have spoken to the Sasquatch telepathically, people who have gotten to an area that is close to where the government already is, and they don't want anybody on their turf because there's a gold mine of value in that whole business, whether it's UFO, telepathic, psychic, blah, 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 because there are obvious military applications to that.
What's funny, Bill, is not too long ago. How long ago was it, Wes, when you and I went back up there and we saw the helicopter up there and there's the military was involved? How long ago was that? A couple months ago or something like that?
Yeah, probably 2 months.
Yeah, it was probably like 2 months ago. So when Wes and I had our encounter, we've been back several times. We've, checking things out and whatnot. But we went back it was a year ago this month that, we actually had our encounter. And we went back about 2 months ago. And Wes has actually been back there more recent than I have. But the military is also involved in the area where we actually had our encounter. And when Wes and I went up there one night, there was a trailer parked up there. And I've talked about this on the show before, and I think I told Will about it too. There was a trailer up there with a helicopter. They had we went driving by, and they had several cameras set up inside. You could see inside this big, huge trailer thing they had up there. They had a water truck up there, and then they had a camera pointing straight up in there. It was like a 360-degree camera. They were doing several. They were filming a bunch of stuff, and they kind of shoot us along. We had said a few things to them, and we got the feeling like we're unwelcome. And so Wes and I, after about 45 minutes to an hour going through this, we decided that it's probably best that we go. And when we decided to go, I'm guessing it was probably about 11:30 midnight, something like that. On the way down, coming down out of the mountain, down the road there, they had 2 cars actually follow us all the way down the mountain, all the way out down to the main highway, which is about a 30-minute drive. So these cars followed us for about a half hour afterwards. And so it was, they definitely know something's going on. It was, Wes and I were, we were actually kind of scared because these people are following us at a high rate of speed. I would speed up and they would speed up, and this went on for quite some time. So they definitely know what's going on. Something's going on. And I wish they would share it, but I don't think they're going to anytime soon.
Just interesting how protective they are, the government is, and with recent events from our government and this whole budget BS, I'm trying not to sound like an angry old man. I don't think I'm old at 49, but I've about had it up to here with the government. And as far as I'm concerned, the government can kiss my ass. I have no use for them, and I'm sounding like an angry old man, but I don't have any use for them.
Do you yell at children to get off your lawn?
No, you know what I do? You know what I do
Okay.
when I see children on my lawn? I'll tell you what I do when I see children on my lawn. I actually live in the woods and we don't have a lawn. I tell the children to go to their science teacher and say the following: Bigfoot is real, science is wrong, deal with it.
Well put. Well put.
I know we're getting low on time, and I wanted to ask you, Bill, what do you think about, and I want to play the Trent vocalizations, but what do you think about people, well, let me do this. Let me play this for you guys real quick. It's the Trent vocalizations. Basically what it is, this guy claims to have Sasquatch around his property. These aren't night sounds. You know, most of the sounds you hear are from parabolic ears picking up recordings of Sasquatches at night. This is actually during the day, and I sent Will and Woody, and I'll send it over to you, Bill, this YouTube video, and I also threw it up on Bigfoot Hotspot Radio. But what do you think? Listen to these vocalizations and then tell me what you think. I cut like his dog barking and him walking around making a bunch of noise, so I cut it down to just the vocalizations. But let me play this real quick for you guys. Tell me what you think.
Very interesting. That was my first thought when I heard that was, what must somebody who doesn't give the Sasquatch any thought think if they're in the woods and hear that?
They'd be having to change their pants. I've actually heard noises very similar to that, so I think that's a legitimate one.
It reminded me a lot of the Umatilla sounds, didn't it? It kind of
very
sounded
similar,
like
right?
Yeah, they did. That's the first thing I thought of was the Umatilla sounds.
It's very interesting. It's hard to gauge volume and distance when it's a recording, but for the person there, just like the sounds I mentioned earlier, I heard them from so far off, I could only imagine what it would be like next to me, or yards, 50 yards or less, how loud that would be.
It does get very loud. When we were in Yakult back in 89, 90, they were coming down off Yakult Mountain doing basically that. And it was, they were only a few hundred yards away, so it was very, very loud. And every dog and coyote, it would just make them crazy within earshot. Yeah,
coyotes are I hear a lot of the interactions with them and coyotes. I hear them out here. I was hoping that they would start their nightly chirping session while I was standing out here, and it would make great audio for the show. But they're very astute. When I walk out to the edge of my driveway, when I hear them and I walk to the edge of the driveway, they're still deep in the woods, but everything stops when I get near the road.
And Will, this might be a question for you. And Bill, you kind of jogged my memory on something. We've had several people on our previous shows that have made the comment that Bigfoot and coyotes actually hunt together or run together. Is that something that you've encountered, Will?
No, actually, the Sasquatch hunt coyotes. They eat them.
Really? Because I've had so many people say in the process of hearing Sasquatch or Bigfoot, that coyotes are right with them, and I thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, the reason for that is like I mentioned before, the state trooper Mark Pittenger in the Puyallup Screamer events. How we first came onto that was, of course, the Indians, and I can't remember which tribe, but the loose translation was ventriloquism, for what they used, and what it really meant was they were imitating other animals. Pittenger, the state trooper, followed this line of Sasquatch tracks. There were 3 Sasquatches there back in the early 70s. What he found, he come across this site where there were, I don't remember how many coyotes that were just torn to pieces, parts missing. What he found was these things were imitating the coyote, and they had recordings, of known coyote noises and the Sasquatch noises, and they were very similar, but you could tell the difference. If you knew what coyote sounded like, they have a lot of yipping and barking and stuff. The Sasquatch noise didn't have any of that, but it was similar, the sound, and what they were doing, they would lure them in with those cries, and when they got too close, the Sasquatches would grab them by their hindquarters, and they were smashing their heads against the older trees, tearing them apart and eating them. And it scared Pittenger so bad, he said he crawled out, and he had his 30-06 with him, and he crawled out on his belly, hoping they wouldn't detect him being there.
I remember you telling that on our show, and that was an amazing account, and always more credence to it when it's told by law enforcement or military.
It was interesting, and we've heard them before. The area, of course, I grew up just a few miles south of where all that was going on, and saw 2 of those 3 creatures, and we found tracks of all 3 of them there. And we would hear coyotes all the time in that area, and, before we knew what Bigfoot was, that there was anything different about it. But once we started listening, usually, the singular one that was louder, of course, the whole packs, there were, I think, 3 different packs of coyotes in that area, up to 20 or 30 of them in a group sometimes, and they would just go crazy. But they would respond to those singular cries. That's what they were doing. They were hunting them.
So when you hear stories, do you think that all Sasquatches are good, Bill, or do you think that there's bad ones? What's kind of your take on?
There are rogues. That is evident when you look at like Teddy Roosevelt, the wilderness hunter, when he talks about the two prospectors. I think it was in Idaho. One of them is killed. Other accounts where I've heard that they've been killed. Will was told by a lady that had, psychic abilities. I remember him. That sticks with me forever. The one that had it in for you. There are rogues. The male I talked about earlier who killed the female. They're just like humans. You're going to have most of them play by the rules, but right place, wrong time. It might not be good to come across one.
No, I was going to say, and I hate to kind of go backwards, but we had talked a little bit about as far as trying to find Bigfoot or hunt Bigfoot. And Bill, you have, and I know you touched on it a little bit before earlier in the show, and you believe that they're possibly a spiritual being crossed with maybe being able to be here on the earth as a actual being or animal. If you were going to go out and you were going to try to capture a Bigfoot, what do you think would be the best way to go out and capture a Sasquatch or Bigfoot, beings that they're possibly interdimensional, or do you even think it's ever going to happen?
I want to say I don't think it'll ever happen. One of the questions I asked Kathleen to ask the Sasquatch people were, had they ever heard of Justin Smasia, or however you say his name? Are you all familiar with the guy who claimed to have killed a couple of them not long ago?
Yeah.
Right. The answer that came back from them was, yes, we know of him. And Kathleen said there was a dark shadow around him that they projected, and they said he's in great danger if he comes looking for us, and that's all they would say about it. The thing is, if somebody goes out and tries to capture or kill one, I fully believe they will be killed themselves. If you go out with evil intent, it's going to come back at you times 10, and you more than likely, I'd almost certainly say, would not live to talk about it. How he got away with it, if he killed him, I don't know. I just know that time will tell.
I appreciate the answer. I don't know how to really respond to that. Will, what do you think? What is your opinion on something like that?
Well, again, I think it depends on which type we're talking about.
If my life is in danger, and I feel like my life is in danger by a Sasquatch or Bigfoot, I'm taking him out. It's either him or me. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I wouldn't feel like I would have this dark shadow cast upon me if my life was in danger, I guess.
No, not at all. And who would defend themselves if they could? I'd do the same thing. If one was coming after me and I had a means to defend myself, I'm not going to just hold out my hands palm facing forward and say, kumbaya, let's dance.
Yeah.
Kumbaya. Yeah, because we made the comment on the last show that we don't feel like the ones that Wes and I encountered. I had made the comment, hey, there's no warm fuzzy feeling here. I felt like it was either we were going to be at dinner or we need to get the hell out of there. On that type of case, I feel that I don't think there would be any repercussions.
Some clans will not have contact with humans at all because of what we do to the environment, the way we trash it, the way we act and carry on. No matter what you do, no matter how warm and fuzzy you try to be, some clans will not have anything to do with us because of their disgust. And I'm sure that in the right place, right time, if one could get one of us, and there are cases of it happening. It has happened if you choose to believe the stories.
I've heard several. Will, Wes, and myself have been talking quite a bit, and Will shared several encounters with me that I've never heard before about people disappearing. Will, you talked about the plane wreck last week, about how they found the plane, they found no survivors. Where are all the people? They found the wreckage, but there was no people to be found. Same with the Clackamas River. They say that people have drowned in the Clackamas River, but if you're from the Vancouver, Portland, Clackamas, Estacada area, the Clackamas River, you can't really drown unless you're 2 or 3 years old. If you're an adult, it's going to be pretty hard to drown. You're going to wash up, or you're going to survive.
Yeah, the river's just not that deep.
And it's not that deep. It's a fast-moving river, and it's colder than hell, but, you're not going to – I don't think it's something that's going to take a full-grown adult person and kill them and wash them away and never be found. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, I know we're getting low on time. Go ahead, Wood. I got 2 last things I want to go over, but go ahead, Wood.
I was just going to say, Bill, talking to you a little bit earlier, you were talking to Wes, and you're talking about a Christian and whatnot, and I don't know if I should bring up biblical stuff, but I'll do it anyways. I don't know if you're familiar with the Book of Enoch at all, or have you heard of that? Or
Yeah, I've really devoured that book and bought into it and still buy into it, although Kiwoni in his book, the Psychic Sasquatch and Their Interdimensional Connection, said that the guy in that book came out a year later and said it's all false, and I don't quite believe that. I disagree with Kiwoni on that. With the detail he describes and the incidences, there's no mention of psychic. That's what gets me, and one thing I wanted to get in right quick was what confuses me is that when I do hear accounts that I choose to believe, there's no mention of psychic, and as deep as that guy got with those people, there's never a mention of any psychic phenomenon, no disappearing. It's all quite normal, and that makes it even more confusing for me. But I love the book, ate it up.
I guess my question to you then would be, you might be familiar with the Nephilim. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that Bigfoot might be part of the Nephilim?
I'll tell you why I believe no, and I don't want to sound like Kiwoni's book is my Bible, but it's touched me in a way that's hard to describe. He left a pen and paper in the woods for them to write thoughts down, and he has it in his book. In that book, they say, we are not evil spirit, we are not Nephilim, we are of God, we are your older brother, and it's in broken English and written very, almost like a third grader would write. That's a great question you bring up, and one that I've wrestled with, and I think I found the answer when I read that book, especially when I chose to believe that it was in their own words, straight from the horse's mouth. No insult intended.
Yeah, that's something I've also struggled with too. Wes and I kind of started reading it a few years ago, and it was, and it was actually before our encounter. And they speak in the Book of Enoch about the Nephilim and the giants and the spirits that were casted down, and they, mated with women here on Earth. And I don't know what to think about it, really, to be honest with you. I don't know if there's a connection or not. I really don't know. Here's what they say, and this runs right smack in the middle of my Christian beliefs, so you can imagine what this is like for me to try to swallow. But what they say is that they were seeded here long before us, that they were brought here by aliens, ETs, brought here and helped in the seeding of us, and that we're newer, they're older, they've been here a lot longer. But you can imagine what that would go over like a fart in church if I tried to explain to a Christian who believes the Bible. I'm more of a spiritual person, and as far as my relationship with God, and don't spend hardly any time in the Bible. That doesn't mean I don't believe in God, but that's what they say happened. And so that, take it as you want to take it, but it in some circles would be very controversial. But why? God's not going to punish me for seeking the truth, is what I always come back to. No, and I agree with you. I agree with you there too. I'm glad you voiced your opinion. A lot of people would, not do that. Like I said, I'm still in the learning process. I'm fairly new to this. I have I'm open-minded, and I appreciate your input, Bill. I really do.
No problem. It's fun to put yourself out there, and because I don't have to do business in my local community, I can talk about it. As a voice guy, I do stuff all over the nation, and I never meet my clients, so I've got some safe harbor there. If I had to do business in the community, I'd be a whole lot quieter about it.
I know we're running short on time, and I want to ask Bill this last two things, and Will and Woody. I just sent this to you guys too. Did you guys see that tricopter film of a Bigfoot in this Ohio Salt Fork State Park? It's actually a pretty good video. So this guy's flying around this helicopter. I think it's a helicopter. They call that tricopter. But he's flying it back and forth, and he's right on this wood line. And as he comes back for another turn, and the camera on it I was kind of shocked how actually, it's like an HD camera almost. But he's flying this thing around, and as he turns the tricopter, and it points down because he's trying to go in between. He's trying to do these tricks, going between trees and see how low he can get. It kind of looks like, it's a blob squatch. Don't get me wrong, but it's just kind of a weird spot for a person to be, and it's all black. But I'll throw it up on Facebook. But if you get a chance, check that out. I don't know if you, how much you're into. But I would say 99% of the videos and stuff out there are complete garbage. But I just thought this was kind of cool. This isn't even a Bigfoot guy. He was just flying around, checking out his video, and he went back and he saw it, and he was like, what the heck is that? Clear enough to where, you don't need the red circle. It made me think, we're dumping $400,000 into the Falcon project, and here this guy's flying around this little tricopter with a camera on it. Anyway, that's enough about knocking the Falcon project.
Well, and the one thing I keep hearing in my communication with those who claim to talk to them is that you cannot sneak up, you cannot outsmart. Your heart and your intentions have to be in the right place for them to come to you. And then if you turn around and go to the public with proof, you have betrayed them, and it's all over for you. Not literally, but it's a very tricky, it's almost like a double-edged sword, and that's what leads me to believe that perhaps as unpopular as this opinion may be, that the mystery is not meant to ever be solved and may never be solved. I could be wrong, but I just get a feeling that this is the way it's supposed to work, and unless we advance in the next 50,000 years to be able to do what they do, we'll still be where we are.
You don't think this is something that's going to happen? And I ask, we've interviewed a lot of people. One of the questions I like to ask them is you don't believe that we're going to actually have an answer to what Bigfoot or Sasquatch is in our lifetime? I mean, you obviously said 50,000 years, so I guess that would be a no.
I don't think so in our lifetime. I know I was watching a wonderful UFO program the other night. John Kennedy, 1 month before he was assassinated, wrote NASA wanting to get to the bottom of the UFO thing, and he was assassinated a month later. I'm not saying that that's why he got assassinated, but he was going to be one of the first presidents to say, damn it, pull the curtain back and let's get to the bottom of this. Well, it cost him his life. So presidential power couldn't even crack the cloak of secrecy. And if the government does have the answer, especially if there's a Bigfoot alien connection, they're going to go to great lengths to guard that and not let that get out, because it would upset the social structure from science to religion to all sorts of things.
No, I don't know if you have anything for Bill Will. The only last thing I want to talk about was the Orang Pendek project, that Cliff Brockman's doing. Now, do you think that the Orang Pendek is the same thing as Bigfoot, just a smaller version, Bill, or what's your take on that?
I don't know a whole lot about it. I think if I were to just to take as uneducated a guess as I could, my first thought would be that maybe it's something like the Minnesota Iceman, the Chinese Yeren. I just don't know that much about it. And so, it's like when people get a photograph or they sneak up or they're sitting there saying in a report they watched this creature for 15 minutes. Well, how can it be psychic if they were able to watch it for 15 minutes and it not see them? So, it's just I wish I knew more about that, but it's one of the least known areas of this for me as far as knowledge.
No, and that's all right. I mean, it was the least known for me. What do you think? Well, basically, the Orang Pendek, I'm sure you already know what it is, but it's a shorter version of, I think it's about 3 feet tall, 2 to 3 feet tall?
Yeah. And it's, my thought, when you guys were talking about that was, okay, why go to China and look for something when you're supposed to be looking for something right here? You know what I mean? It's too easy to get scattered all over the place.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Why not just stay in one spot and focus.
Yeah.
We got a few minutes left, and Will, I wanted to ask you the same question that I asked Bill, and I already know what your answer is going to be, but I want to hear you tell me anyways, if you would. Do you think that we are going to become, do you think that we'll be able to see a Sasquatch or figure out what he is or what Bigfoot is within our lifetime? And if so, what are the best steps to find out how to do that?
My thoughts are, of course, based on a lot of years of experience in the field. The Sasquatches that I've looked for are more animalistic, so my opinion has been evolving much towards the direction of there being multiple species, and I think there's plenty of evidence for that. But the ones I'm looking for are the ones that I saw, and the same one you guys saw. And I think that we can collect the right evidence and prove that they're real. I mean, if nothing else, the burial sites. I know where a number of those are, and it only would take one tooth to prove the existence, and it'd be a done deal.
Amen to that.
Yeah, we'll call it Operation Gravedigger, but we might do a little recon on that this weekend, Will.
Okay, and like I said, it's just a matter of, you go pull up one of those piles and you find a single tooth, then that's it. That's all the proof there has to be. You don't have to have a whole body. It's done.
Yeah, that'd be the way to prove it.
Yeah, that would be the ideal way to prove it too.
Yeah, Will said that on my show before too, and I do agree that if you could get to one now, can you get out of there without being ripped in half? It's what about the Smithsonian? Haven't they received bones and such that get conveniently lost? I've heard accounts of that. Why would they do that?
Well, let me tell you this. A lot of times in universities, and I know when I first went to college, I worked in the archaeology department. My buddy Ron and I volunteered to work in the lab. I thought it would be interesting to do that. And basically what we did was process specimens. When you work on an archaeological dig, you go through, you dig a test pit or whatever pit you're working on. It's a 1 meter square pit, and you're going down 10 centimeters at each interval. And you just bag and number the materials. It goes back to the lab, it gets cleaned, processed, numbered, stuck in a bag or a box, and it's put away until somebody whoever decides to come along at a later time and take an interest in that material to study it and write a paper. Otherwise, it just sits cataloged, and there's just tons and tons of material in universities all over the country, probably the world in exactly the same way. Unless it really stuck out as something different, it could sit there for 100 years or more and nobody'd ever take a second look at it. Plenty of examples, things that were collected, 200 years ago. There was a story, and I don't remember what year exactly, I want to say 1830s, a couple of bones were collected by some locals, sent it to some doctor. And, of course, what doctors were like in the 1830s. And it was in John Green's book. In fact, the story was called Rare Specimen or something like that. But they sent this person the bones. Nothing was ever heard or done with it. And this has gone on for many, many years occasionally, where bones are found or partially decomposing corpses. Either the people who found them didn't know what to do with it, were disgusted by it, took a portion of it, and then the bones later disappeared. I don't know how many times I've seen these kinds of stories and talked to people who've had these situations happen. I mean, even footprint casts. I know of old-timers, up around Mount Rainier who found Bigfoot casts when they were logging. They cast the tracks in cement. When the old-timer died, his wife, when this one story, in fact, the wife threw the casts away. This kind of stuff happens. Not everybody's on the edge of their chair when it comes to Bigfoot. Whoever's interested, they're sort of allowed, their interest, and then when that person's no longer there, then the stuff is thrown away. Same with the university. Stuff sits there. People don't know what it is. I even found a bear skeleton one time, which is extremely rare. I took it into a friend of mine who was a bone expert, and he never could figure out what it was. I finally had to tell him it was a bear. But had it been up to him, it would have been stuffed in a box and put away somewhere.
Where'd you find the bear skeleton, just out of curiosity?
It was up towards Enumclaw.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is...
Actually, I didn't find it. A friend of mine found it, who was a big-time outdoorsman. Here's the interesting part about that. Number one, it was in an area of Sasquatch activity. In fact, not far from the two elk I told you about. They were dismembered by two Sasquatches. I mean, within just a couple of miles. And the bear carcass was completely untouched by either dogs in nearby farms or coyotes. It was exactly intact. No skin or anything there, just the bones. The snout was crushed into its skull. Mm. So, I mean, to me, I without knowing directly, there was only one thing that could have killed it, in my opinion, in that manner.
Yeah, that's unless Woody hit it in the face. I mean, I can't think of anything else besides the Bigfoot.
Well, yeah, that could be.
He's a pretty big guy.
Well, yeah, he could have suffered the effects of that Taco Bell 5-layer burrito.
Yeah,
that's a little too close.
Could have been that too.
I do have a sick sense of humor, and I'm trying to work up the nerve to ask Kathleen, who's a close friend, to ask him when she goes into sacred space if their farts are as obnoxious as some humans I know, but I just can't bring myself to do that.
I think it's a valid question.
I think so too.
Well, yeah. How do you
We've taken a really excited. Oh my!
Inquiring minds want to know.
Well, if you think that's bizarre, there's everything out there. I guess what I'm trying to say, it's an amazing world we live in. There are still many more secrets that may or may not ever be revealed, and I'm glad that we don't have all the answers. It makes it interesting, and one thing we can all agree on is that there is something out there. This is not mass hallucination. It's not misidentification. There is something out there, and it's a fascinating world. For those people who don't care about Sasquatch or UFOs, I'm thinking, are you happy watching Revolution on TV? Is that the extent of your excitement? I love Revolution for what it's worth.
I do too.
I eat it out. My wife got me hooked on it. I'd just seen watch all the animal shows and the big cats, snakes, and whatnot. But when I got married, I started having to watch some shows, and I've really fallen in love with Revolution. But it's an amazing world we live in, and I guess if and I try to keep my answers short so we can all have time to speak. It's just for those listening, keep an open mind and remember we haven't seen it all. And if you want to put that paranormal aspect of Sasquatch in the back of your mind, put it in the back of your mind. Just don't discard it.
Well put. So we're out of time. I want to thank Bill Lee from Inspired by Bigfoot on every Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. Central Time. You can also find him at iTunes and at inspiredbybigfoot.wq4d.net. Bill, your call-in number for your show is 347-996-5242, so I'll be listening on Tuesday. But I want to thank you for coming on.
That. Hey, not a problem, and we appreciate the conversation. This has been a lot of fun, and it's given me a chance to turn around and be the interviewee instead of the interviewer, and just ask everybody again to keep an open mind. I don't come on here trying to make people mad or to present an alternative view, because I've got nothing better to do with my time. I just feel a real strong tug that what I'm hearing, that there's truth to it, and that way if somebody sees something or experiences that down the road, it might lessen the shock if they've heard about it beforehand.
Appreciate coming on and sharing your views.
Good deal. Well, thank you all. I've had a ball and look forward to talking to you again on and off the air. And we'll also set up to have you guys come on the show, and we'll see what we can get into and talk about one of the most fascinating subjects to come along in a long time.
Thanks again, Bill.